Well, Tim, your last album as Bomb the Bass was Clear in 1995.
That's about right, I think.
Yeah. Okay. It's well, it's too much maybe too, but in short, what happened in 13 years? Have you continued being Bomb the Bass as a? Yeah. Why did you have this album earlier? Wanting to make it earlier?
Absolutely. It was never my intention for the record to take 13 years, you know, or I started it back at the end of 97, 98.
Okay.
You know, and if everything went as smoothly as planned, it would have been finished 10 years ago.
But
in fact, there were a couple of false starts. I think, you know, I just wasn't ready to finish the fourth Bomb the Bass record at that time, you know, because I think at that period of time I was just mentally and physically exhausted. You know, I'd spent 10, 11, 12 years working with other people, you know, producing bands, and really I think that just took it all out of me. So by the time, you know, I wanted to start the fourth Bomb the Bass album, I felt uninspired. And the music that I did start, you know, if I listen back to it, it wasn't bad, but my headspace just wasn't in the right place at that time. I think that was the main reason, you know.
It was a really, when did you stop making the album back then?
Well, I stopped and started a few times. In 2000, I moved here to Amsterdam just to get away from London and just to take a break more than anything else, you know. And so for a few years I was, you know, getting into new technology, learning about new software, about how I would like to do music in the future. You know, the idea of being mobile really appealed to me. Being able to travel around just with a laptop and make music in different studios, you know.
Was it hard for you because you were maybe one of the first generations making electronic and house music, and then all the new evolving, you know, all the new technologies, is it, could you cope with it? You know?
Absolutely. I mean, I've always been into new technology. You know, the main difference, I suppose, when I first started was hardware. You know, I had a drum machine and a synthesizer, a CS01 monophonic synthesizer, and that was the beginnings of how I got into making music, you know, really, really simple. And that's how I understood about programming drum machines and understanding sound sculpture, I suppose, you know, by just using these first two instruments that I bought. And as time went on, I felt the process of making music just became more and more complicated because of choice. And I think a lot of the problem I actually had with previous versions of Future Chaos was choice. And I thought back, why? It never used to be so difficult, you know, and I thought back about how I got into it, and I thought it's just a drum machine and a keyboard. And that's really how Future Chaos got completed, because I said, well, instead of the keyboard I had, I use a mini moog and a drum machine, and that's how, that is the sound of Future Chaos.
So basically, you work more or less the same as 20 years ago now?
Basically, I've stripped everything back and taken away all the choices and limited myself to what was really required to make a record, you know, without all the complications of plugins and what is the latest software that you've got to use, you know. Forget all of that nonsense. You know, just keep it as basic as possible.